Maple syrup, the pride of Canada. Pure, golden, straight from the tree. But for seniors, that sweet promise could be hiding something dangerous. From lead contamination to adulteration scandals and mold-riddled bottles slipping past inspectors, some brands are putting your health at serious risk. Today, we expose 9 maple syrup brands to avoid and the 2 that are actually safe. Coming in at number 9, we have Camp Maple Syrup. Camp has been a staple on Canadian breakfast tables for decades. The iconic can, the nostalgic branding. Your grandmother probably poured it over her pancakes. But here is the betrayal most people never discover. Camp is not even real maple syrup. Read the label closely. What you are actually buying is maple-flavored corn syrup, artificial flavoring, caramel coloring, high fructose corn syrup as the primary ingredient. For seniors managing diabetes, blood sugar levels, or trying to reduce processed food intake, this is a dietary disaster hiding behind trusted name. The packaging shows a cozy cabin in the woods. It promises that authentic Canadian maple experience. But the truth is far different. You are consuming a highly processed, sugar-laden imitation that can spike blood glucose levels within minutes of consumption. For anyone on metformin or other diabetes medications, this rapid sugar surge can interfere with how your body processes those drugs. Your medication timing and dosing calculations become unreliable when you are consuming products that behave unpredictably in your bloodstream. The high fructose corn syrup in Camp is produced through an industrial process that converts glucose into fructose using enzymes. This is not natural sugar from a tree. This is chemically transformed starch from corn that your body processes completely differently than genuine maple sugar. Research published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition found that high fructose corn syrup consumption is associated with increased visceral fat accumulation. That dangerous belly fat wraps around your organs and increases cardiovascular risk. Camp has been caught in misleading advertising controversies. Consumers filed complaints about the confusing labeling that makes it look like real maple syrup when it is not. The CFIA received reports, yet the product still sits on shelves across Canada, right next to genuine maple syrup, at a lower price point that tricks budget-conscious seniors into thinking they are getting a deal. You are not getting a deal. You are getting deceived. Non-alcoholic fatty liver disease affects approximately 25% of Canadians, with prevalence increasing significantly after age 50. Every tablespoon of Camp syrup adds to your liver's burden. Over years of regular consumption, that burden accumulates into measurable organ damage. Why is it still legal to sell corn syrup in a can that looks like maple syrup? That is a question worth asking. At number 8, we have Aunt Jemima, now rebranded as Pearl Milling Company. The name changed. The recipe did not, and the health risks certainly have not improved. Pearl Milling Company syrup contains 0% actual maple syrup, not a drop. What you are pouring on your waffles is a chemical cocktail of high fructose corn syrup, cellulose gum, sodium hexametaphosphate, caramel color, and artificial flavors. For seniors with kidney issues, that sodium hexametaphosphate is particularly concerning. It is a phosphate additive that can accumulate in kidney tissue over time. If you are already dealing with reduced kidney function, as many Canadians over 60 are, this additive forces your kidneys to work harder, potentially accelerating decline. The cellulose gum is essentially wood pulp filler. It is there to create thickness and that syrupy texture you expect. But your digestive system was not designed to process wood derivatives. Seniors with IBS, diverticulitis, or other gastrointestinal sensitivities often report bloating and discomfort after consuming products with cellulose gum. And let us talk about the caramel coloring. Class Year caramel color, the type commonly used in these imitation syrups, has been linked in studies to increased inflammation marks. Chronic inflammation is already a concern for seniors dealing with arthritis, cardiovascular disease, or autoimmune conditions. Why add fuel to that fire? The betrayal here is in the imagery, the warm, home-style branding, the suggestion of tradition and quality. But tradition does not include a chemistry lab full of additives. Your grandmother would be horrified to learn what is actually in that bottle now. Do not go yet. The solution comes at the very end, and it could change how you shop forever. Now, at number 7, it is President's Choice Pure Maple Syrup. This one is going to surprise you. President's Choice is actually real maple syrup, 100% pure. So why is it on our avoid list? Because purity does not guarantee safety. In 2016, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency conducted a massive investigation into maple syrup fraud. They tested hundreds of samples from across the industry. What they found was disturbing. Some bottles labeled as pure Canadian maple syrup were found to contain beet sugar, cane sugar, and rice syrup diluting the product. The maple syrup industry was facing an adulteration crisis. President's choice sources from multiple suppliers across Quebec and Ontario. That supply chain complexity creates opportunities for contamination and fraud that even strict testing protocols can miss. Batch-to-batch consistency becomes nearly impossible to guarantee when you are aggregating from dozens of sugar bushes with varying quality control standards. But here's the health concern that should alarm every senior: lead contamination. Maple syrup production involves boiling sap in large evaporators. Older equipment, especially equipment manufactured before lead regulations tightened, can leach heavy metals into the syrup during this high-heat process. A 2019 study by researchers at McGill University found detectable lead levels in certain maple syrup samples, particularly from smaller operations using legacy equipment. Lead accumulates in your body over time. It does not flush out easily. For seniors, this bioaccumulation can worsen cognitive decline, damage kidney function, and interfere with cardiovascular health. Even low-level exposure is concerning when you are consuming the product regularly over years. Ever notice how billion-dollar food companies keep having recalls, yet their products are still on every shelf? Want the real truth about what is on your plate? Subscribe now so you never get blindsided by hidden food dangers. We reveal the facts others will not tell you every single week. Coming in at number 6, we have no-name pure maple syrup, Loblaw's budget brand, the yellow label, the promise of quality at a lower price point. But when it comes to maple syrup, that lower price might be costing you more than you realize. No-name maple syrup is sourced through the same Loblaw's supply chain as President's Choice, often from overlapping producers. That means the same concerns about supply chain transparency and heavy metal testing apply here, possibly even more so, given the pressure to hit lower price targets. When a company needs to cut costs, where do those cuts happen? Testing frequency, quality control inspections, rejection of borderline batches that might pass minimal standards but would not meet premium thresholds. Consumer complaints on grocery review sites tell a troubling story. Reports of crystallization forming in bottles before the expiration date. Descriptions of off flavors, sometimes metallic, sometimes fermented. Bottles with cloudy sediment that should not be present in properly processed maple syrup. For seniors with compromised immune systems, that cloudiness could indicate bacterial growth. Maple syrup is naturally resistant to bacterial contamination due to its sugar density, but improperly processed or stored syrup can harbor mold spores and yeasts that survive in the bottle. Once opened and exposed to air, these microorganisms can multiply. One reviewer described opening a bottle of no-name maple syrup and finding what appeared to be mold floating on the surface, despite the bottle being within its shelf-life date. Another reported a strange fizzing when they opened a supposedly sealed bottle, suggesting fermentation had occurred. The CFIA sets minimum standards, but minimum standards mean exactly that, the lowest acceptable threshold. For seniors managing multiple health conditions, minimum acceptable is not good enough. At number 5, it is Kirkland's signature organic maple syrup from Costco. The Costco Kirkland brand has built a reputation for quality at scale. The organic label promises cleaner production methods. So why should seniors be cautious? Because organic certification does not test for everything. Kirkland's signature maple syrup is sourced primarily from Quebec. It carries the USDA organic seal, which means the sugar bushes were not treated with synthetic pesticides or fertilizers. Good start. But organic certification does not require testing for heavy metals. It does not mandate lead screening. It does not verify that the evaporating equipment is not leaching contaminants into your syrup. In fact, a 2021 investigation by marketplace journalists found that some organic maple syrup producers were using equipment older than the organic regulations themselves. That vintage equipment may have been grandfathered into compliance without ever being tested for the contamination risks it might pose. And then there is the bulk packaging issue. Costco sells maple syrup in large containers, often a liter or more. That is economic. But for a senior living alone or as a couple, that is months of consumption from a single container. Once opened, maple syrup begins a slow degradation process. Exposure to air introduces moisture that can dilute the sugar concentration below the threshold that naturally prevents bacterial growth. The CFIA recommends refrigerating maple syrup after opening and consuming within 6 months. But how many people actually follow that guidance? How many seniors have that large Costco bottle sitting in their pantry, not their fridge, being used gradually over a year or more? Most people never learn how to fix this, but we will break it down at the end of the video. Now at number 4, we have Shady Maple Farms Organic Maple Syrup. The name evokes pastoral imagery, a shady grove of maple trees, traditional farming values. But behind that rustic branding, there have been some concerning developments. Shady Maple Farms is one of the largest organic maple syrup producers in Canada. That scale requires industrial-level processing that can compromise the artisanal quality their marketing suggests. They process millions of gallons annually, which means relying on massive evaporating systems, extensive supply chains, and high-volume quality control that may miss individual batch issues. In 2017, the company was involved in the largest maple syrup heist in history, the Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist. While Shady Maple Farms was not accused of wrongdoing, the incident exposed vulnerabilities in supply chain integrity across the industry. Stolen syrup was mixed with legitimate product and sold into normal distribution channels. How much of that adulterated syrup made it to consumers? Nobody knows for certain. Consumer reports indicate inconsistent quality across Shady Maple Farms products. Some batches taste excellent, rich, deep amber, authentic maple flavor. Other batches from the same product line taste weak, watery, or have unusual undertones that suggest processing issues or storage problems. That inconsistency matters. When you are managing your sugar intake for diabetes, you need to know exactly what you are consuming. A batch that has been diluted or improperly processed may have a different glycemic impact than a properly produced batch. Your careful carbohydrate counting becomes meaningless if the product itself is not consistent. Do you think the government protects consumers or the food industry? That is worth thinking about. Coming in at number 3, it is Jakeman's Maple Syrup, a fourth-generation family maple producer from Ontario. Authentic heritage. Real maple farming tradition. Surely this must be safe. Not necessarily. In 2012, Jakeman's issued a recall for maple syrup products due to potential glass contamination. Yes, glass. Fragments that could have made it into bottles and into your body. For seniors taking blood thinners like warfarin, internal bleeding from glass fragment ingestion could be catastrophic. The company handled the recall appropriately, and no injuries were reported. But the incident reveals something important about small batch production. When you are not operating at industrial scale, your quality control systems may be less robust. Equipment failures, human errors, and contamination events may be caught less quickly than at larger facilities with more rigorous protocols. Since then, Jakeman's has expanded significantly. They now supply major retailers across Canada and internationally. That growth strain can test quality control systems. What worked for a small family operation may not scale effectively to mass production. Consumer reviews from the past 2 years indicate a decline in consistency. Reports of syrup that is too thin. Batches with an unusual bitter aftertaste that should not be present in quality maple syrup. Complaints about bottles that leak or have compromised seals. For seniors with dental issues, that thin consistency is more than a quality concern. Watery syrup does not coat food properly, leading to overpouring and higher sugar consumption than intended. You think you are being moderate, but you are actually consuming twice the serving size to get the flavor you want. Why are seniors targeted with traditional, wholesome branding when the product inside might not match the promise? It is a question the industry does not want to answer. At number 2, we have Maple Grove Farms. Despite the Canadian-sounding name, Maple Grove Farms is actually based in Vermont, USA. They market heavily in Canada, capitalizing on the assumption that maple syrup automatically means Canadian quality. But American maple syrup production faces different regulatory oversight than Canadian production. The FDA regulates maple syrup in the United States, while the CFIA handles Canadian products. These agencies have different standards, different testing frequencies, and different enforcement priorities. That regulatory gap can create quality inconsistencies for cross-border products. But here is the real concern with Maple Grove Farms for Canadian seniors. They produce a range of products, including sugar-free and light maple syrups, that substitute artificial sweeteners and thickeners for natural maple sugar. These products are marketed to diabetics and health-conscious consumers as better alternatives. The problem? Those artificial sweeteners come with their own health concerns. Maple Grove Farms sugar-free syrup contains sucralose, acesulfame potassium, and cellulose gum. For seniors taking certain medications, these artificial sweeteners can interfere with drug absorption. Sucralose has been shown in some studies to affect gut bacteria, the same gut bacteria that influence how your body processes cardiovascular medications. Acesulfame potassium is even more concerning. Research from the National Toxicology Program has raised questions about potential carcinogenic properties. While the FDA considers it safe, many health-conscious Canadians prefer to avoid it entirely, especially those already dealing with health challenges. If butter can legally contain metal fragments, what else do you think slips through that we do not even hear about? And coming in at number 1, the top brand to avoid is Crown Royal Maple Syrup. Wait, not the whiskey. This is Crown brand maple syrup, sold in that distinctive blue and yellow packaging across Canadian grocery stores. And it represents perhaps the most troubling betrayal of trust on our entire list. Crown has positioned itself as an affordable pure maple syrup option for budget-conscious Canadian families. The packaging prominently displays 100% pure maple syrup and features imagery of maple leaves and Canadian heritage. But behind that patriotic branding, there is a troubling history. In 2022, the CFIA tested maple syrup samples from across Canada as part of routine surveillance. Crown products showed some of the highest variability in quality among major brands. Some samples met all standards. Others showed signs of adulteration, specifically the isotopic signatures that indicate mixing with non-maple sugars. Industry studies estimate that maple syrup fraud costs Canadian producers over $30 million annually. That fraud does not disappear. It ends up in bottles that consumers buy, trusting the labels. When a company sources from multiple suppliers without rigorous verification, they become part of that fraud pipeline, whether they intend to or not. Crown denied any intentional adulteration and suggested the variance might be due to supply chain complexity. But for seniors trying to manage their health, that explanation is not reassuring. If a company cannot guarantee consistent, pure product, why should you trust them with your well-being? Crown has been cited in the past for equipment maintenance issues at their processing facilities. Older evaporating equipment, maintenance schedules that may have been delayed for cost reasons. Those are exactly the conditions that lead to heavy metal leaching, the lead contamination concern we discussed earlier. A Health Canada study found that Canadians over age 60 have significantly higher blood lead levels than younger adults, a legacy of decades of environmental exposure. Those elevated baseline levels mean any additional lead intake has outsized impact. Your body is already carrying a burden. Every contaminated food product adds to that burden. Lead exposure is cumulative. Every contaminated dose adds to your body's burden. For seniors already dealing with decades of environmental lead exposure from leaded gasoline, old paint, and other historical sources, additional exposure from food products accelerates the damage. The cognitive effects are particularly concerning. Lead exposure is linked to accelerated dementia progression, memory issues, and difficulty concentrating. For a senior trying to maintain mental sharpness, consuming a contaminated food product regularly over years could make a meaningful difference in their cognitive trajectory. Research published in JAMA Neurology found that even low-level lead exposure in older adults is associated with faster rates of cognitive decline. The study followed participants for over a decade and found dose-response relationships. More lead exposure meant faster cognitive deterioration. That is not a risk you want to take with your breakfast. Crown is one of the most widely distributed brands in Canada. They are in Walmart, Sobeys, Metro, independent grocers, and convenience stores across the country. Their low price point makes them the default choice for budget-conscious Canadians who do not know what we have just revealed. Why do you think the CFIA lets brands use supply chain complexity as an excuse for inconsistent quality? Is it oversight or something else? Now, for what you have been waiting for. After everything we have exposed, you might be wondering if any maple syrup is actually safe. The answer is yes, but you need to know where to look. The first safe option is LB, Maple Treat Pure Maple Syrup. LB Maple Treat has been producing maple syrup in Quebec since 1975. They are a family-owned operation, genuinely family-owned, not just marketed that way, with direct control over their entire production process from tree to bottle. What sets them apart? Transparency and testing. LB Maple Treat conducts regular heavy metal testing on their products and has shared those results with independent laboratories for verification. Their lead levels consistently test below detection limits, not just below regulatory thresholds, but actually undetectable. They use modern stainless steel evaporating equipment that eliminates the contamination risks associated with older legacy systems. Every batch is tested for adulteration before bottling. Their supply chain is short and fully traceable. You can actually visit the sugar bush where your syrup was produced. For seniors concerned about blood sugar management, their products are consistently graded and labeled accurately. When you buy a Grade A Golden Delicate, that is exactly what you get. No batch-to-batch surprises that throw off your carbohydrate counting. They also offer smaller bottle sizes ideal for seniors living alone or as couples. Instead of buying a massive container that sits open for months developing contamination, you can purchase a size that you will actually finish within the recommended time frame. The company has never had a recall. They have never been cited for CFIA violations. For seniors managing diabetes, kidney function, or cardiovascular health, that premium is an investment in your well-being. The second recommendation is Bernard Fine Foods Pure Organic Maple Syrup. Bernard has operated in Quebec since 1979 and represents the gold standard for organic maple syrup production in Canada. Their operation combines organic certification with rigorous testing protocols that go far beyond what regulations require. Every batch of Bernard maple syrup undergoes testing for heavy metals, pesticide residues, and microbial contamination. They test at levels more stringent than CFIA requirements because they believe Canadian consumers deserve better than minimum standards. Their internal quality thresholds reject batches that would technically pass regulatory inspection, but do not meet Bernard's higher benchmarks. Their evaporating facilities use exclusively modern, food-grade stainless steel equipment. No legacy systems, no grandfather clauses, no contamination pathways from outdated infrastructure. They have invested millions in equipment upgrades specifically to eliminate the heavy metal contamination risks that plague other producers. What makes Bernard particularly valuable for health-conscious seniors is their commitment to batch traceability. Every bottle includes a lot number that can be traced back to the specific sugar bush, harvest date, and production run. If you ever have a concern about a product, they can identify exactly where it came from and provide complete testing documentation. For seniors with compromised immune systems, their microbial testing protocols provide additional assurance. Every batch is verified free of mold, yeast, and bacterial contamination before it reaches store shelves. The taste difference is noticeable. Clean, pure maple flavor, without the metallic undertones or suspicious off-notes that plague lower-quality brands. When you have been consuming questionable syrup for years, the first taste of genuinely pure maple syrup is a revelation. Bernard costs more than mass-market brands. But consider what you are avoiding: lead contamination, adulteration, bacterial growth, and quality inconsistencies that could impact your health over years of consumption. That price difference is protection. Not all maple syrup is created equal, and some brands are putting your health at risk while wearing the maple leaf like a badge of honor. Now you know which ones to avoid and which ones actually deserve your trust. Subscribe now. And if you are watching on TV, tap your remote so you never get blindsided again.